So let's take a look at Ruth chapter 2, and someone read verse 1 through 7, and we'll start talking about this law of gleaning. Who will read chapter 2, verse 1 through 7?
Now Naomi had a relative on the husband's side from the clan of Amalek, a man of standing whose name was Boaz. And Ruth the Moabitess said to Naomi, "Let me go to the fields and pick up leftover grain behind anyone in whose eyes I find favor." Naomi said to her, "Go ahead, my daughter." And so she went out and began to glean in the fields behind the harvesters. And as it turned out, she found herself working in a field belonging to Boaz, who was from the clan of Elimelech. Just then Boaz arrived from Bethlehem and greeted the harvesters. "The Lord be with you," and "The Lord bless you," they called back. And Boaz asked the foreman of his harvesters, "Whose young woman is that?" And the foreman replied, "She is the Moabitess who came back from Moab with Naomi." And she said, "Please let me glean and gather among the sheaves behind the harvesters." And she went into the field and has worked steadily from morning till now, except for a short rest in the shelter.
Okay, so we have the setting here. Now, the law of gleaning is what we find. But the very first verse, the readers that are familiar with the Old Testament laws that God gave to His people, their ears are perked because they hear that Naomi has a relative. Now that word in Hebrew is goel, which means redeemer. Now when we hear the word redeemer, we think about Jesus because He's our redeemer. But the New Testament word redemption or redeemer comes from the Old Testament word for a near relative that in case you fell on hard times, that redeemer would come and save you, deliver you, pay your bills, help you get through the difficult time. And of course, we'll get into chapter 3 where it took on kind of a strange to us sound anyway. But right away we hear how God is working in Naomi's life and in Ruth's life because Naomi has a redeemer. Elimelech's a relative, an uncle or a cousin or someone from the clan of Elimelech is there, and his name is Boaz. So Ruth has learned somehow, maybe during her time in Moab, being married to Naomi's, but she knows about the law of gleaning. It was unique to Israel. And the law of gleaning, let's read about it. Let's get some different readers. Someone read Leviticus 19, verse 9 and 10. Who'll do that? Raise your hand. Let me see. Leviticus 19, 9 and 10. No, not everybody can't do. Everybody can put your hands down. That's just one thing. No, just one, please. Okay, Stacy.
When you reap the harvest of your land, thou shalt not wholly reap the corners of thy field, neither shalt thou gather the gleaning of thy harvest. And thou shalt not glean thy vineyard, neither shalt thou gather the fallen fruit from thy vineyard. Thou shalt leave them for the poor and for the sojourner. I am Jehovah your God.
Okay, this law of gleaning reveals something about God. That's how it ends. I'm the Lord your God. Do this because I am the Lord your God. Obeying this law will be a witness of who I am. That's why the other nations didn't do this. Because who would not go back after you've done a harvest and pick up the parts, some of the harvest that accidentally fell to the ground? You're going to get as much as you can. And no one would leave the corners. Are you kidding me? No, you're going to get all of it. But for the barley, the wheat, the olives, and the grapes, which are all were grown, so it was an agricultural setting that they were going into. Now remember, God is giving these laws to Israel in the wilderness. They wouldn't be able to practice this for 40 years. Come on. You don't have any harvest in the wilderness. In what they call the Torah, the first 5 books of the Bible, the 5 books of Moses, Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy. Torah means instruction in Hebrew. And in Torah, there are 613 laws. The rabbis know them very well. Chronologically, the first one, anybody want to take a guess at what the first one is? No, don't. Let me help you. The first one is in Genesis chapter 1. Be fruitful and multiply. The first command of God to Adam and Eve, be fruitful and multiply. Now, of course, the Jews took that as having children. That's why it was shameful not to be able to have a child. You couldn't keep the first commandment, for crying out loud. That's why if you were on the Sanhedrin, if you were part of the elders of Israel, Jesus' day, you were required to have a wife, because you couldn't be a Pharisee and not keep the first commandment. Guess what the last commandment is? In Deuteronomy 34 something. It's kind of strange. Don't drink wine that is prepared by a Gentile. Good grief, we're going to all be in trouble if that one's here in Fredericksburg. Those people from California are here. Those Gentiles. But I mean, so 613 laws. Now here's something interesting. In a pomegranate, any of you ever opened up a red pomegranate? Guess how many seeds are in there? 613 seeds. Rabbis made that connection. There are 248 positive laws. Law of gleaning is one of those. Let people come and glean. It's not a negative, it's a positive. And once again, 248 just so happens to be the number of bones in the human body and major organs, for whatever that's worth. 365 negative commands, one for every day of the year. A blameless Pharisee, that was a term. You got a robe for that. Was someone who kept all 613 laws for at least 1 year and could prove it. You got a special robe. Paul, he says, I was a Pharisee, the son of a Pharisee, concerning the law, blameless. And they gave him a robe, and that robe got him into synagogues when he became a missionary and gave him the invitation to preach and teach at any synagogue in the world. A blameless Pharisee. Just a little sideline, I'm running out of time. Let's look at another one. Look at Leviticus chapter 23, verse 22. 23:22. Someone read that one. Law of gleaning. Leviticus 23:22. Okay, Jana?
When you reap the harvest of your land, do not reap to the very edges of the field, or gather the gleanings of your harvest. Leave them for the poor and for the foreigner residing among you. I am the Lord your God.
It's almost verbatim from the few chapters earlier. And anytime you're reading the Bible and you see something repeated twice, that is a Hebrew language technique for major emphasis. If any of you have taken the precepts study by what's her name? Kay Arthur. She teaches that. Notice as you're reading, and when there's a word that's repeated, something is coming up again and again, that is a neon sign to say, okay, here's something that's going to help me interpret this. And then, of course, in Deuteronomy, look at Deuteronomy 24:21. Someone read that one quickly. Deuteronomy 24:21. Law of gleaning. And then we're going to ask a question. Deuteronomy 24:21.
When you gather the grapes of the vineyard, you shall not strip it afterward. It shall be for the sojourner, the fatherless, and the widow.
So let me ask this question. What does that say about God? What does that law, the law of gleaning, reveal about the character of God?
He provides for all.
He's a provider. He provides for the poor. He's Jehovah Jireh, the God, Abraham. God will provide for the widow because she has no support, for the orphan because he has no support, for the sojourner, the alien. Now, if you read on, I believe in Deuteronomy, he goes on to say, because you too were a slave in Egypt. You know the condition of being in another country and being a minority. And so this reveals the word is the providence of God. That God is a provider. Now, what does that say to us in Fredericksburg in 2020? Now, don't go to the immigration. Don't go there just yet.
We need to do the same.
Yeah. But we've got to think about our setting here, but I don't want anybody to jump the train here. But we do need to have an eye open for people that are in need. And to look at the abundance that we have and how is the best way to share without just dumping it on them. Because see, the law of gleaning was leave it there for them to get. They will be able to come in there and pick it up. Now we've got to really think about that. What does that look like in our day? Because here's the deal. It says something about God. First of all, that He has given us more than we need, and others not so much, but how do we share it in such a way that not only God be magnified as the provider, but also for those who are the recipient, that they have a part in this. To recognize that it's not from us, it's from God. This is why you begin to apply these. But here's the deal. The other 612 commandments, all of them reveal something about God. Don't ever try to read through Leviticus in a hurry because it's just full of these laws. Every time you read one, you should stop and say, what does that reveal about the character of God? And here's the other question. How did Jesus fulfill it? Because Jesus fulfilled the law of gleaning. Amen. Well, we need about 20 minutes to explore that, but we only have 5. So we're not going to be able to. But we can't go any further into this chapter. We're not going to be able to read all of it, but as you know, of course, there's the way that Boaz walks into his field and addresses his servants. The Lord be with you. The Lord bless you. And they answer back then, the Lord be with you. That's just like saying, Happy Wednesday. God bless you. That says something about Boaz from the beginning. But there's a phrase here in verse 3 that's huge. Let me read from my translation, chapter 2, verse 3. So she set out and went and gleaned in the field after the reapers. And it just so happened, it says, and it just so happened, she happened to come to the part of the field belonging to Boaz. Now, what does that say to you? It just happened to happen that she found the field of Boaz.
Providence of God.
The providence of God. Now, what does the providence of God mean? It's built on the word provide. God is the provider, Jehovah Jireh. He's the provider. But what is the teaching of the providence of God?
He's sovereign and in total control.
He's sovereign, He's in control, and He's involved in our lives. He led Ruth to the field of the man that is the picture of what Israel and God intended them to be. not only was he generous with Ruth, as you read the rest of the chapter, he had heard of her commitment and was responding to show her that the commitment that she made to seek after and to stay with Naomi was going to be a great blessing according to the Word of God. Now, I've been very interested, and I'm going to hurry home after this to finish watching the 3-night special on George Washington. Have any of y'all been watching that? Yeah. I didn't get to watch it all last night. I just got too sleepy. I won't stay up that late. But it's recorded, I think. Unfortunately, they did not, History Channel did not emphasize his faith like I thought they would. But it is kind of hard to dig out. Washington was British, although born here, but he was very much Anglican. But he would talk about the providence of God a lot. In other words, he was not deist. Jefferson, now deist. A deist believed, yes, God the Creator, but he kind of set everything in motion and stands back and is not involved. Deists do not believe in miracles. But Washington gave his hand away as he would constantly talk about providence. The Battle of Long Island, August 1776, a month and 2 months after the Declaration of Independence, the British in Boston were after New York City, and they surrounded the 10,000 soldiers of the Continental Army. 32,000 British soldiers had them completely surrounded in Brooklyn. If any of you are familiar, that's across the river from Manhattan, New York. Long Island, Brooklyn. And the British generals, this was a short rebellion. They were going to annihilate them. There was no way for them to escape. That night, Washington, in boats, got most of the soldiers across in the night over into Manhattan. But there was still like 5,000 left at daybreak. The British Navy was coming up the Hudson River, but for some strange reason, the wind stopped blowing that night. And they were stuck, unable to get to where Washington was crossing. Then at daybreak, Washington's diary said, a strange fog rolled in. Providence took care of us again. And it lifted when the last boat got to Manhattan. The British Army did not know where the Continental Army disappeared to. And of course they retreated. Washington didn't like that, but they were able. And historians have written about it over and over, how the providence of God had a calm night, the ships could not sail, and a strange fog rolled in that allowed the soldiers during the day to continue getting to Manhattan without being seen. The providence of God. We still need to go out to the field. Ruth still was going out. But the providence of God comes in to guide her to the right field. Here's the lesson for us. Never, never, never hesitate to be obedient. Because those who are obedient get to experience the providence of God. He guides us as we obey Him. And His will is worked out, as we will see as we work through the rest of the book of Ruth. Amen. Amen. And hallelujah.